Latinidad panel. One thing about this panel, and as you may know about many Latinos, is that we use English and Spanish often. So you may hear us slip a few Spanish words or even answers as we feel maybe more comfortable with that language, but we'll try to get our point across. So thank you. We're going to get started right away. We'll start with, just want to make sure you guys know who's here. So we have Eduardo Novoa. He is in the cybersecurity lab in the Germantown campus, correct? Originally from Ecuador. Yep. We have Vanessa Zambrano. Thanks for joining us. Vanessa works in the communications office. She's a communications specialist at the college. She is originally from Venezuela. Juan Serrano, you'll find him at the Raptor Central office here on the Rockville campus. And Juan is from the Dominican Republic.
Yes.
Edgar Hernandez, you are a faculty member with the hospitality program and originally from, or your parents are from El Salvador, right?
Yep.
And Carlibet Acevedo, she's from Nicaragua, and you'll find her in helping students in the Germantown campus with all things financial aid, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I memorized all of that.
Yeah, very good.
So thank you. And why don't we start with our first question? So we're gonna talk about our Latino identity and what makes us different, what makes us unique, how our identity is formed. Also, just want to make sure in the back, can you hear us? Awesome. So let's start with, how did your identity become what it is today, and how do you identify in a social setting? Because we identify in many different ways, and that can often be a little bit tricky, right? You don't want to offend anyone, but people just choose different ways to identify their ethnic identity. So anybody want to jump in? I'll start.
So I love this question, Carolina, because one of the first things I think of when you're asking, what makes up my cultural identity are my childhood memories. I'm originally from Nicaragua, and I grew up with my grandparents. My parents immigrated here in the 80s during the Civil War that was going on in Nicaragua. And it was a very dangerous time for us over there. And so my parents decided to come here for a better life. In the meantime, I stayed behind with my grandparents, and I was loving every second of it. I was missing my parents, of course. And just one of the things that I can say that I remember very vividly is, playing in the streets. And one of the things that we played was trompo. It was this little onion-shaped thing. I don't know how to say it in English, but it's like this little onion-shaped thing that you wrap a string around it and you throw it, and then it goes, all around in a circle, And I know there's a name for it in English, but I just can't think of it. So that was one of the activities that we played, and it was so amusing to us. We played cards outside, and just being around in a community setting, being in the neighborhood, knowing your neighbors. And I remember that. And my grandparents actually taught me how to cook too. So even though I came here when I was 8 years old, I was still learning how to cook at a very young age. And one of the things that I remember are the smells. For breakfast we would have eggs and gallo pinto. And gallo pinto is like rice and beans, fried rice and beans. And we would have smoked cheese. Oh my God, it's my favorite. Smoked cheese is my favorite.
So what today, right, if you had to identify yourself in a social setting, what would you say you are?
So I identify as Nicaraguan American because, as I was mentioning some of my childhood memories, I came here when I was 8 years old, and so I've grown up here my entire life. Pretty much. I've only gone back to Nicaragua every now and again just to visit. But I feel like this is my home now. And so I definitely identify as Nicaraguan American. And those things, some of those things that I shared with you about my childhood memories are what really stick with me even today.
Yeah.
Well, I myself identify myself in social settings as Latino or Hispano. And the reason why is because I immigrated from Ecuador when I was 17 years old, 1 week after I graduated from high school. So for the first 17 years of my life, I identify myself as an Ecuadorian. But, having lived here most of my life, and now I feel that I'm part of a larger community. So that's why. So, and I believe that, when it comes to identity, I think that your family and your community comes before your nationality. So the other day, I have two young daughters, 19 and 13, and they're very proud Latinas. And I asked them the other day, I said, what do you mean? What it means to you to be a Latina? Because I wanted to make sure that they understood what they were, trying to project. And I said, what exactly it means to you to be Latina? And I said, I think that what you're trying to say is that you belong, you're a part of a group that shares a common history, a common culture, a common set of values. It's not racial, because we are not a racial group. We are actually multiracial. There are all kinds of Latinos and Latinas, all colors of the rainbow. What we are is a community of people that are bound together by common history, common language, common food, common histories. I've never been to Nicaragua, but what Carly Beth just described, that was my childhood as well. Yeah. Maybe different food, maybe different place, but it was the same. That's what, to me, it means to be a Latino.
As you already mentioned, Latin means it comes in a lot of different flavors, a different color, and I'm the proof of it. So I identify myself as an Afro-Latino, a term that I didn't know until I arrived to the United States in 2020, oh my gosh, on 2001, I'm sorry. Yes, so, it's a term that I didn't know of. To me, the Dominican Republic was the only country I knew at the time. And coming to the United States and seeing la diferencia de cultura que hay en la comunidad latina fue como una especie de abrir los ojos y ver la diferencia que hay, cuánto tenemos que aprender de otras culturas y cuánto tenemos nosotros que enseñar a las culturas que nos rodean.
There's a huge difference, right, across the Latino spectrum, right, and how much there is also to teach. And I'm not translating. I'm going to try to capture, but anyways, thank you, Juan, for that.
You're welcome.
I'll say that my cultural identity was being a Caraqueña, growing up in Caracas, Venezuela, but also my family had immigrated to Venezuela. So I grew up eating food from Bolivia, from Spain, from Italy, as well as Venezuelan food. So it was very local kind of identity growing up there, but at the same time, I always had this idea of, my grandparents have immigrated, my great-grandparents did. So we're kind of a mix of many things, many places. And now I identify as a Latina because I have been living in the United States for many years. I'm raising my kids here, and we are part of this community now. And we're part of, as you said, a broader community of Latinos with similar experiences.
Similar, I think I'm pretty much identify myself as Latino too. I think pretty much how they both described this, it's a whole community, right? It's more than just one part of the country or area. Caribbean, like you said, Caribbean is part of that. Spain, Brazil, you have all these different parts of the world that kind of fits into this kind of big umbrella. So I just identify myself as Latino, specifically gay Latino in my case. So I think that's I can talk more about that as we continue on as well.
Awesome. So if you immigrated, did your identity evolve, and how did immigration or the stereotypes of immigrants change your perceived identity?
I immigrated when I was 17 years old, quite young, and my identity, first of all, let me start by saying that obviously I'm one of the older members of the panel. I'm a Generation X Latino, so I grew up in the 80s, 90s, and so you see, when I was growing up, your identity is shaped by the ideas of the place where you're growing up. At the time, if you can imagine growing up in the 70s and 80s in Ecuador, was a time when most Ecuadorians look like me. Carolina is also Ecuadorian, but most Ecuadorians look like me, which is basically mestizos of mixed race. And unfortunately, in our culture, and it's still prevalent, but back then it was even more. You try to deny the one part of your identity. You try to identify with one part of your identity more than others. And at the time, it was the cultural thing to try to deny the indigenous part of my identity, my heritage. And when I moved here, actually, I had a knee-jerk reaction, and it was the opposite thing. I started trying to deny the European part of my heritage. And of course, obviously, both approaches are wrong. It's with time and maturity that I understood that I'm neither, and I'm both, and I'm none. Mm-hmm. So that, having lived to different places, times, ideas, and, your own personal growth and development is what have brought me to this place and what I am, being comfortable in my own skin. And I believe that this is where I always thought that we as Latinos, as Hispanics, we see ourselves in the mirrors and we don't see ourselves. We try to project something else. But that's not just us, this is not just our community. Many different cultures do the same. So I think that it's only when we see ourselves, who we truly are in the mirror, then we are happy and comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And that's how, my identity has evolved. Thank you.
So growing up with the stereotypes, some of the stereotypes about immigrants, such as, we all come from Mexico, right? Mm-hmm. that was like a big, growing up here, I was like, I'm not from Mexico, mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm from Nicaragua, and do you know where that is? Like growing up with that, didn't really change my perceived identity. It just made me want to talk more about my particular identity so that people can know who I was and where Nicaragua was and what that means to us as Latin Americans, right? But another stereotype that I grew up with that I can say, really impacted me is when they say that immigrants come to this country to take the low-wage jobs. And that's actually not true at all. And in fact, one of the articles that I was reading recently said that a lot of the immigrants come here, they're entrepreneurs. They come and they build businesses. And actually $775 million just in revenue for the immigrant businesses alone. And so, but growing up listening to that, it kind of like makes you feel, like bad a little bit, like, wait a minute, like where are we getting all this information from? And let's take away the myths. Let's demystify this and let's really talk about like what Latinos do for this country, And so my identity evolved over time, and listening to these stereotypes, it just made me want to, it made me feel more proud of who I was, and it made me want to inform people better about who we really are.
As someone who was born in the U.S. but came here for good around age 30, I came with my husband, and he was born and raised in Venezuela. So what really made my identity evolve into feeling part of this broader community and to try to understand the experience here was coming in and seeing how he was treated by the immigration system. Mm-hmm. And what separated us was luck. Was simply that my parents had come here for some time, and I had happened to be born here. We had both grown up in Venezuela. Our parents even went to college together, so very similar people, and that was just luck. And seeing the humiliation and seeing how people are seen as criminals for simply trying to come here for a better life really opened my eyes to, that was kind of the beginning for me of this is how we are treated here. So that really kind of cemented my identity as in the U.S. we're Latinos, and this is, let me try to understand this and navigate this and have more empathy for every other group, and to so that shock with the immigration system was what really did it for me.
It's like that. It's like your experiences inform the level of solidarity that you end up taking, right, with fellow Latinos that maybe in our home countries we would disassociate with because of just white supremacy, right, which is everywhere. It's all over Latin America, and I share so much of what you said as well. I mean, You come here and you're like, wait, I'm in a different, you place yourself socially in a very different map than you did before. And that's an interesting kind of realization that happens over time, and you don't realize it until you begin to really reflect. So if anybody else has anything to add, we don't have to, but we can keep going.
So I was born here, but something kind of like picking back off, I feel like how the system in the U.S. kind of works. It's like when I think about when I was like a little like kid going into school, they immediately just threw me into ESOL, right? And it's almost like this, like, I want to describe it, I'm speaking for myself, there's almost kind of like this brainwashing of like, my culture, my language is not acceptable here. And I think it kind of reflects on me kind of now, even then. I mean, I speak Spanish, but it's very, how I describe it, it's like choppy. It's not fluent, right? But I think that kind of was a huge factor, because for me, my parents, they were very hardworking. They were working in dishwasher, they were in the kitchen. My mom was a housekeeper. So again, I was in school during the day. When I get home, they're working. So I didn't have the opportunity to, again, practice my Spanish with them as much. So I think a lot of it goes part to the school's factor, where they kind of were not accepting of this culture of like me knowing this other language as well. They're wanting to just be me wanting to learn like English, and that's what they want the main focus to be.
I would like to add a little more to that. On my experience, I feel like that arriving to the United States, I don't know what was in my head. I don't know what I was thinking that United States was. But actually, when I arrived and I saw around me, I was like, that's not what I thought it was. So I went through, you don't look Latino, you don't look Hispanic. You're black. And I went through so many things that I'm like, that's when I decided that I had to defend who I am. I need to be sure who I am so I can project it to other people. It don't matter the color of my skin. It don't matter the language that I speak. I am who I am, and this is what you learn. This is what you're going to learn from me.
So, as we have kind of actually mentioned a little bit about, language and our language abilities, I do want to, a lot of you were able to take that poll before we got started. So let's take a look at just the room. Who do we have here? Give me a second, I'm going to pull it up. All right, and this is also informative for our panelists, so they can get a sense. 22 respondents, let's see. So, we don't have to do names. All right, so we have about 7 Latinos, 4 Hispanics, okay. This is your preference, right, as to how you identify? So primarily Latino, Hispanic, right? And then some are country specific. You guys are mostly either immigrants or other, which could be born here, right? And some first or second generation. Yeah. So as far as if you've ever, have you been called Spanish, right?
Oh, yeah.
For those that are Latinos, but you are not from Spain, your immediate reaction, no harm, no foul. You're all pretty cool about it, but some of you do, 5 of you, will respond with a brief explanation, and 6 of you doesn't apply to your experience. Now, as far as your level of fluency, we have about 40% who are fluent in the room, 18% who are conversational, and some 9% who would say hablo poquito, right? 30% who are non-speakers. And we would say maybe about half the room has sometimes felt misunderstood in relation to your ethnic identity. So if you've never been misunderstood, that's awesome. You get to learn a lot about what it's like to be in our shoes. Okay, so next question about that, right? What is something that's often misunderstood about your identity? And I think, Juan, you kind of touched on that. If anyone else wants to add to that briefly.
I think that Carly Beth already mentioned that, they like to group us, for people of non-Latino, Hispanic origin, they like to group us somehow, either with the word Spanish or Mexican, and they don't understand the nuances and the difference and what we really are. I think that that's, one of the biggest things. And second, that, again, for most people that are not familiar, when they visualize a Latino or Hispanic, probably say they see somebody like me. They don't understand that there's, Latinos, Latinas that look different than me. They expect something. So I think that that's one of the things, and it's always sometimes I think it's an opportunity when you refer to that question about you can either try to explain, you can try to reason. Sometimes you just don't care. Sometimes you just don't. I used to be, I guess, a little bit more aggressive in the sense that people ask me where were from, and it's like Ecuador. Do you even know where that is? If not, this is whatever you want to call me. But I think that now I owe it to myself and to everybody else to explain that a little bit further, to educate people. But yeah, I think that that's the biggest thing that, they try to group us together, lump us together, ideologically, racially, politically, even with food. They think that we all eat tortillas. Nothing wrong. I love tortillas. I mean, my wife is Salvadoran. But you know what? We are a rainbow of people. What makes us, we're an ethnic group. We are not a racial. We are not a country. We are many countries, many trees. And I think that that's the biggest misunderstood aspect.
Yeah, and though if we were a country in the United States, we'd be the 5th largest country in the world. So just putting that out there.
La patria grande.
Power in numbers. Talk about the voting power, right? Anyone else?
Yeah, I want to add to that. So I think that's exactly right what Eduardo said, is that the diversity, that we're so diverse, not only, because of the different languages that are prevalent in the different Latin American countries, not just Spanish. Spanish is not the only language, right? I mean, just in Nicaragua alone, there's a coast, and in the coast we have African influence, and we have the Mesquite language, and there's other indigenous people that live in Nicaragua, and we all have that Mayan connection, right? So just understanding that our culture and history is so rich, you can't lump us all together, because just every country is so rich and diverse that we really have to explore that even more. And every time I go back to Nicaragua, there's like something different I didn't know. I was like, are you kidding? I didn't know about this, And so it's like amazing. And I think that, and it makes me want to explore every other country too. So it just being that having that curiosity, and sparking that curiosity in others, and saying, hey, we don't all eat tacos, right? There's so much more, so much more diversity. So yeah, I think just kind of being proactive in educating everyone about that.
You reminded me of, there's empanadas in almost every Latin American country.
And tamales.
And tamales too. And but they're a little different, right, in each country. And so it's almost like, you can't put us in the same box, but we're also very similar. And I think that's the nuance we're trying to get at here. So, I wanted to show you all a quote and let you all react to it. So Toni Morrison said, "In this country, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. Please react."
This again has to do with what I was referring earlier as like how we see ourselves as peoples when we see ourselves in the mirror. And I think for a long time, America, when it looked itself in the mirror, saw a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant person, preferably a male. Obviously, that's not the reality of America. I think what Toni Morrison was trying to say is like, if you don't belong to that group, then you have to explain why you are a different American. And that's where the hyphenation, African Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, Colombian Americans, you have to explain yourself why you are not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And unfortunately, the flip side to that is that allows to create subcategories, people that are less American than. You cannot be a full American because you were not born here. You are not a full American because you are not a WASP. So, you're a little less American. As what percentage of American you are, it will depend on who is doing that judgment. But that's my reaction to that comment.
Yeah, I feel like growing up outside of the U.S., looking at media here and who held power and who showed up in movies and shows, that's exactly what it looked like. That is what the United States looks like. That's that's who's important or holds power in the U.S. And everybody else is kind of a subset of that, right? And I think it's a colonization of the mind, really, for all of us that are Americans as well, to remind ourselves all the time that we are full Americans as well, even if we came from other places, because white Americans also came from other places, right? So we all get to be Americans, or we all get to be hyphenated. It shouldn't be a separation.
I feel that that's the image that once the United States, and I don't want to sound wrong here, but that's the image that Toni Morrison wants to project. The white American is only white. But guess what? The Latin American came over and we brought flavor to the United States. Because that's what we are. The sparkle is that the white didn't have, we brought it in, and now we all mix.
Spice things up.
Yes.
Well, also, we are part of the Americas.
Yes.
Which makes it interesting that even though geographically we're joined together, we're not very together in every other aspect. Just something I wanted to point out.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing about that? I don't know, for other people who grew up elsewhere, we learned America as a continent, as one continent.
One continent, that's right. Yep.
Like everywhere other than the U.S., I feel like it's been taught that way. And then you get here, and it's like, no, South American and North America are all Americans in the sense of from the America, from the continent of Americans. Just pointing that out.
And I would like to follow up that with something that I think is important. We sometimes perpetuate this ourselves because we tend to call white people Americano, Americana, so we perpetuate these ourselves. We need to stop doing that. And we need to start, helping people identify themselves. That's how they are comfortable with, But this is something that we need to start doing too. We need to stop perpetuating this. We cannot only say this is wrong. We need to start working towards correcting it. So thank you.
Please get to know my American friends.
Yeah, going back to what Vanessa was saying, growing up, I also learned that we're only 5 continents. It was new to me when I came to the United States that we're 7. And I'm like, but what is this? Where did they came from? And they were trying to explain it to me, like I said, North America and South America. But I'm like, but they American. So can you explain that to me? They're still connected. There's no division between the two. Yes, they connected. So it was gonna weird for me to relearn that instead of 5, there were 7.
That is a decision.
All right, so let's do a lightning round on who would be your historical figure that you admire, and just who and why, real quick.
Well, to me, it's actually a Venezuelan, Simón Bolívar. And the reason is because he is one of the first proponents of Pan-Americanism. I don't agree with everything he said or did. Again, that we need to look at history with the right context, But one of the things that he foresaw, and he was completely correct, is that the only way that we will become who we are destined to be is by becoming united. Mm-hmm. And second, while he was very, very a big admirer of the Founding Fathers and the American Revolution, he was very weary of what the United States was going to do to a small, undivided, not united Latin American country. So that to me, his ideas are still prevalent and as valid today as they were 200 years ago.
Thank you.
And can I say somebody who's still alive? Isabel Allende would be for me. I studied journalism, so as a writer, I read pretty much every book she had went out when I was a teenager, and she was an immigrant from Chile to Venezuela, lived 10 years in Venezuela, then came to the United States. So I really admire the way she has written to preserve the story of her family, the history of her country, her roots. She has really held on to her roots by writing to make sense of her reality and to pass it on to other generations. I think that's very valuable.
So mine is someone that's also currently still alive, Jose Andres. I'm a big foodie. I work in the department itself, so I love anything food related. But him in particular, Jose Andres, again, if you don't know who he is, he's a local chef here in DC. He has like 10 restaurants in this area alone. But his humanitarian work that he does when certain things take place, it's something very, I think, huge that he does for everyone. And again, it's all across the board. Like as soon as the Ukraine, Russia incident happened, he was over there making food with like his crew. So I think that's very impactful because that food, again, in our culture is very important. So I think how he's spreading that, his love and passion for food across the world is amazing.
For me, I have two because I'm, Nicaraguan American. So my first one is Rubén Darío, a Nicaraguan poet called the father of modernism. And he influenced Spanish literature. And I love his poems. I grew up with his poems. The second one is someone who is still alive and someone I look up to as well is Alexandria Cortez, the first woman of color to be elected to the 14th Congressional District in New York, so in Congress. And she was the youngest one as well. And so, that's someone I look up to as well because I think that especially being so young and having, so much passion for politics and for representation, Latino representation. I think we need more.
In my case, I would like to say why first. Is someone who tried really hard, educated himself to the maximum. He became a lawyer in my country. He wanted to become a politician. He wanted to become a president, but he didn't get a chance just because of the color of his skin. And his name is Jose Francisco Peña Gómez. He didn't have a chance because the color of the skin. There's no other explanation that I can give. Someone that's so well educated, that had so much knowledge, couldn't make it.
And I would just say that the problem wasn't the color, it was the racism. I know what you mean.
But yes.
So Latinos, as you know, are increasingly a majority minority in this country. In various spaces, you'll see it, right? In schools, and we hope to see this in other places as well. So as our ethnic group grows in the U.S. over the next 50 years, by the way, young Latinos under 18 are about half of the group in the U.S. So we're talking big group and primarily young. What are some of the advantages and disadvantages of becoming a majority minority?
So I'm also a spin instructor. So in that kind of environment, we can say demographic is, let's say, mid, a woman, white. So I think it goes two ways, right? When I teach my classes, I influence it with a lot of Hispanic music, reggaeton, salsa, bachata, etc., right? So it goes both ways. I'm exposing or I'm showing the class different type of music, rhythm. But again, at the same time, I feel like certain places almost want to use you as like a check mark. We have someone of color, Latino, check. So it's kind of like a weird, you're doing it. For me, I'm doing it because I love it. It's my passion. I'm trying to educate too, right? Not just fitness, but like also educate you about culture. But again, I think sometimes people can just see it as a check mark. So it's kind of this weird.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, I think that, I agree. One of the advantages is that, other cultures, other Americans are being exposed to real Latino culture at large, what we've been discussing here. So that's a big advantage. Also that our political power, our economic influence keeps on growing. And I think that that's positives. The data that you just gave us that, all these young people, all these, these Gen Zers are now the bulk of the Latino population in the US is very promising because you are going to be shaping, the future of the country, of the world in a few years. So I think that that's very good. Now, the disadvantage that I can see, it's something that also now we are starting in places that we were not there before. Again, because for a long time, Latinos and Latinas, stay within certain professions, certain jobs. Now we're starting to branch. And here, this panel is just a great, example of that. Now, not all Latinos work in the, in the food industry, in the service industries. We are starting to branch. We're starting to get educated. We're starting to. So the disadvantage to that, though, is like when you, what you refer as, you wonder, was I hired here to be the token Latino, the token Latina, or was I hired because I really deserve this job? Also, it's difficult because when you're the first in that job position, whatever, you feel that pressure that you need to succeed because you are opening the path, for everybody else behind you. And if you do well, then yeah, you are doing great. But if for whatever reason you are considered a failure, then that's when comments open as like, you see, this is what happened when you put somebody that is not ready to do this job. So it's always, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that there's power in the numbers, like Carolina said, but I still feel like we need more unity.
Yeah.
We definitely need more unity. And I think that being a majority minority gives us that advantage in numbers, but we have to unite as a Latino community. There's so many things that we're so diverse, and I think we have to come together about so many different issues. And I think what that will look like, it will be really interesting to see what that will look like, in the next 10 years, especially with a new generation of young Latinos that were mostly raised here, right, and born here, or born here in the U.S. So I think that's going to paint a different picture. But I think being in those spaces is very important because, as Eduardo was saying, before we used to be known more in the services area, and now we're moving up and we're becoming more educated and we're having more influential roles. Like my example of Alexandria Cortez, who is representing us now in New York in Congress. So it is important to be in those spaces. So I think there's more advantages than disadvantages. I just think we still have to come together as a community.
I feel that we are going to have a lot of advantages, but I'm afraid of something, and it's that for us, the first generation, like we said, we had to struggle to get somewhere. For the new generation, they're going to have everything so easy that they're going to lose what's behind it. They're going to lose that I had to work to get what I want. I had to work hard. I had to do an extra effort to get it. But then having it so easy, they may not appreciate where they're coming from.
It sounds like you're a parent. One of the concerns I have is that, something is forged in your immigration experience that produces an immigrant that is resilient, that knows what it's like to have to work hard, to fight for what they have. And so how do you instill that resilience, right, in the next generation? This is not a Latino only thing. This is a general American, right? Because part of what it means to be American, in my view, is that you come here and you have an opportunity to build the life you want. Yes, with more hurdles for some than others, but there's still that advantage and that opportunity, right? So how do you really pass that, give that legacy to the next generation? How do you not let the culture become diluted? That's another concern that I have. And yes, there's more, there's an availability of cultural things now in the U.S. where there wasn't that before because they were bigger in numbers. So you see more festivals, you see more restaurants, you see more of all these things. But I think the real work happens at home, the language, right? Not everyone has the advantage of learning the Spanish language because of different factors. And so how does that, right, impact your ability to identify with the ethnic group, right? When you feel excluded because you don't speak the language sometimes, right? So those are all, just things to think about. Now, let's talk a little bit about your roles here at the college. How would you say you approach your role at the college in a culturally responsive way? I mean, I think for me, it's rather easy because I was hired to do work in Spanish to reach, audiences that would not normally approach the college through media, obviously. But what about you all? What would you say? How would you say your role here is executed that way?
I think it's both an opportunity and this is actually the right place. This is actually the right place for many different reasons. Number one, if you're not aware, Montgomery College has been designated as a Hispanic serving institution. Right. So we do work in an institution that is trying to promote that connection with the Hispanic community, and it's been validated to that. Second, I believe that specifically for me, being in the IT field and cybersecurity in particular, that is a field that I'm very passionate about, that we need more Latinos and Latinas in. I was just telling them that today I received great news. I'm going to start a partnership, the lab, with a local national organization called Raíces, which is an organization that is Latinos and Latinas professionals in cybersecurity. Only 4% of cybersecurity professionals are Latinos or Latinas of origin. So this, to me, is an opportunity to prove to people, to young Latinos and Latinas that are maybe looking in this career, yeah, I did it, you can do it. So that's the opportunity, that's how I approach it. But at the same time, I think that I have a personal and professional responsibility to represent the college. But when I talk to people, they see me as a representative of the college, but they also always going to see me as a Latino, like Hispanic. So it's a dual responsibility. And I think that you have to approach that from both sides. Not only you're representing both the college, you're representing also your community, your culture. And it is hard sometimes because, you cannot be everything to everybody. But I think that this, to me, instead of a burden, is an opportunity. So, thanks.
I think for me, it comes naturally to be inclusive. Equity and inclusion are so important. And it's actually a part of my research. I'm currently doing my doctoral program, and I love every single minute of it because I get to come back and implement that here at Montgomery College, And so the way that I am, instilling my culture, my beliefs, whatever you want to say, and I think I'm just being inclusive. Like not only am I talking about, my culture, sharing cultures and beliefs with everyone, and making everyone feel welcome, but just being inclusive. And I like studying a lot of this sense of belonging, how do the students feel, and I like doing a lot of surveys and looking at data, just to see how the students are feeling and if what I'm doing is being culturally sensitive with them. I work in financial aid, and working in financial aid, I have also a big responsibility in making sure that it's equitable, that everyone has access to financial aid. And so I think I do it in many ways. I do it naturally, and I'm also, learning more and more so that I can continue to provide an inclusive environment, because I think that's so important, especially being in such a diverse college.
I'm blessed in the sense, I guess, that again, what I do is I teach food, right? So I like to pick recipes that are from different parts of the world, not just Latinx, but also including all different parts like Asia, India, different things of that nature. So which again, when I took on this role, that's something that when I was looking at what was the original recipes before, I'm like, well, we got to switch things up because there's no diversity in regards to these recipes, right? So it's nice that I'm in this role now where I can kind of expose the students to different types of cuisines, different types of ingredients, spices that they're like, whoa, what is this? I've never tried this before. So I'm blessed in that sense. And again, I was an MC student turned into an adjunct faculty member. So I think I always push that and to show that to the students, you literally don't know where you can end up. Everything starts from right here in this classroom setting. So just put your best game in and the world is your possibility.
Just like Carolina, I'm in the Office of Communication, so we do a lot of content in Spanish. It's a lot about language access. We're part of a language advisory group that brings people together from all parts of the college to make sure that we're translating material to at least the 6 top languages in Montgomery County. We're always looking at, do we need to add others, etc. But to make sure that we're reaching prospective students, people in the community, and even MC employees that may not be fluent in English. So that's very important to me for people, because some people in my own family don't speak English. You're always thinking, you're looking at things through that lens of, if I don't speak this language, how can I access these resources, especially because we have English classes and all that. So how do we incorporate people and let language not be an obstacle for that? So that's really what I'm thinking about most of the time for my role.
In my role, I'm basically the face of the college when the student arrives to the college for the first time. So I'm the one, and I see it on many occasions, on when a student walks in, without knowing English, trying to get someone that help me. I need help, but I don't know how to communicate. It's a relief for them when I tell them, like, I speak Spanish, you can talk to me in Spanish. The face that you see when they're like, oh my gosh, thank you. It's like a payoff for me. Like, I got paid that day when I see that. Being able to help the students when they need it, and the community when they need help in the language, it's a pleasure for me.
I think we all got that. So we are running out of time. So what I want to do is, real quick, ask you, all right, so we're going to try to do a couple more. Briefly, what do you think is the most important contribution that Latinos make to Montgomery County?
They add to the diversity. It's already a very diverse and rich county, and Latinos just add that to the mix. I think that just is one more contribution. Again, that's to me, that's the most important part.
Like I said earlier, we bring the spice, the food, and the music. We have many contributions to the Montgomery County area in music, food, and just has to be us, just to be Latino.
I think different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
With that diversity, there's responsibility, right? And so just having those different perspectives and being able to voice them, I think is important, and I think that we bring a new voice, a different voice, and as Latinos United, a very diverse voice, but definitely an important one.
I think many of us who lost our own communities are working really hard here and are working hard to build community as well, because we know what it's like to lose that, to lose a place. So I think we work really hard to make a good life for our families, our neighbors, and our whole community.
What you said is so good, because when many of us come here, right, we lose so many of the people we love back home, and you begin to create a new family that is not bound by blood, right? It's sometimes by experience or proximity, or just somebody that welcomed you. So you never know that you might be that person for a new immigrant. I know those people have stayed in my life since I was 10 when I immigrated here. So, and they've been through everything with us, and so yeah, they're closer to you than family. They become that way over the years. One last thing, what does it mean to live out your Latinidad, and how do you would you encourage others to live out their unique cultures, right? We don't want to all blend in. That would be boring, especially at a school like MC. So, any thoughts on that? Closing thought.
So I can say that the way I live out my Latinidad is by being myself, by talking about my culture, by sharing the different foods, the different experiences that I bring, like what I mentioned earlier, that those childhood experiences that really make me who I am, and not feeling, not suppressing that in any way, to really show it and to have an exchange. I think it's important to have exchange with people, yeah, the exchange of culture and ideas, and that's what makes a great society.
This is not criticism in anybody has done otherwise, but to me, when I became an American citizen, I had the chance to anglicize, shorten, or change my name, but I decided to keep it as is. It's okay for people to struggle saying my first name or last name. It's fine. This is how I live it. Again, it's not a criticism against people who do otherwise, try to blend in, but to me, this is how I live it. It's front and center. This is a core of who I am. And I try to be a good representative. I try to, and I always said, my culture is not perfect. No culture, no ethnic group is perfect. We have great things and we have things that we need to work on. And I am the first, I'm a big critic of how we need to focus more on education, rather than just hard work. Let's try to create better opportunities for ourselves. We are very resourceful. We are very idealistic. We are very hardworking. We can do much better. But again, I think that I live my Latinidad by being who I am. And again, trying to project a good example as much as possible to all my neighbors, to wherever I go, because this is part of my identity. So,
I guess the common word is being ourselves.
mm-hmm.
We have to be ourselves everywhere we go, and let people learn from us as we learn from them. We are unique. Every Latin country has something unique, and you have to embrace that. So we are ambassador of that.
I think it's nice of identity, right? Because it's something that's also constantly changing. It can be changing for the individual. I'll briefly talk about it. Just again, I identify myself as gay Latino. Again, when I came out to my parents, right, the first thing my dad said is like, no, you're confused. So they have this machismo, right? No, you're a guy, machismo attitude, right? But in a sense, again, I'm like, it got to the point where like, no, that's not who I am. Like, this is who I am. Accept me or not. And then it did take some time, but again, they've accepted me for who I am, So I think just being true to yourself, and again, knowing, it's being true to yourself, that's what it is at the end of the day. Again, knowing that there's always going to be love, there's going to be support. It might not be, it can be from the blood, but also the beautiful thing is it can be from non-blood people as well. So just know there is that support there.
I agree with everybody's talked about it, but authenticity, being who you are completely, and this is the music I like, this is how I pronounce this,
Yeah.
this is my accent, this is my food, and be curious, like we're curious about other people's cultures as well, so.
Unapologetic.
Yes.
Latino.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you so much, Alexandria.